Hey everyone, it's Ornlu, and this video is going to be all about power creep in AoE2 and the top 5 most egregious instances of it in the game right now, as well as the changes I'd personally make to ideally create a more balanced game. In a lot of ways, this is a follow-up to State of the Civs, and it's certainly a concept I harped on about throughout the series. Of course, first things first, what the heck is power creep? So, power creep is a general gaming term that I would define as the gradual increase in strength of various game aspects to keep up with the release of new content. In an AoE2 context, this basically means that older civilizations receive buffs to keep them competitive with the strong new civs that are added to the game. This is not to say that all the new civilizations are instantly overpowered. Heck, as of writing this script, Georgians are in dead last in an online win rate. More so, this has to do with the new civilizations getting more and more situationally powerful bonuses, unique units, and tech tree combinations to better differentiate themselves from the older civilizations. Subsequently, those older civilizations seem to look underpowered, boring, or both, and then get big new buffs to allow them to keep pace with the new civs. This is how we get into an arms race of increasingly strong AoE2 civs, and that is the essence of power creep. Alright, so if power creep is more or less inevitable so long as there's new content being added to the game, what's the point of this video? Well, I would argue that we can slow down power creep and tone back some of the more extreme, newer bonuses and tech tree options given to certain civilizations that currently feel overcompensated. So with that, let's get into my top 5 nerfs, or rather removal of specific buffs, to make some power creepy civs feel a bit more balanced. Starting things at number 5, we have Japanese Cav Archers. This is going to be one of the most recent examples of power creep, as Japanese received their cavalry archers gain +2 damage versus archers bonus with the release of the Mountain Royals on October 31st of last year. Less than 2 weeks later, the bonus was tuned down to specifically exclude skirmishers, but it nevertheless remains a problematic bonus in my eyes. If you've watched any tournament since, well, for a long time, you may have noticed that Japanese have always been a top-tier pick on aggressive hybrid maps. Early wood savings, super strong fishing ships, and a broad mid-game tech tree all contribute to this power on maps where you want to build docks forward and follow it up with a variety of land units. Now, these sorts of maps tend to be very common inclusions from tournament organizers, whereas they are less popular picks on ladder, and this admittedly creates an awkward dynamic for the devs. Japanese are a very common pick in tournaments, but for Arabia and Arena, both in team games and 1v1s, Japanese felt very average. So to address this, the devs gave the already fully upgraded Japanese Cav Archers a powerful bonus against archers to try and improve them on land maps without changing their dynamics on water and hybrid maps. But really, what has this accomplished? Are you more likely to pick Japanese on Arabian Arena than you were before? No, there are still tons of other stronger civs in those settings. However, in situations where Japanese were already good, the civ suddenly finds itself with another deadly mid-game option, and one that scales extremely well into the Imperial Age. It feels like Japanese are even better than ever on maps we're about to see of a lot in Hidden Cup 5. Cross, Cup, High Tides, Bay/Pants, and Evacuation. Now, I know you keyboard warriors in the comments are going to mention that medieval Japanese states made heavy use of Cav Archers, and it was the primary method of fighting for the samurai class. Yes, that's true. However, this is a video game where villagers construct buildings by hitting the ground with a hammer. The in-game Japanese civilization already felt perfectly fine going into Cav Archers if the situation called for it, but that's basically all they do now. And this is a civ that otherwise focuses on a slow push of infantry, foot archers, monks, towers, and trebs. Personally, I would just remove this bonus completely and accept that Japanese are going to be middling on Arabia and Arena. There are 45 civs in the game, so as long as Japanese aren't hopeless on those settings, which they aren't at all, then it's fine if they are not the top tier. The Cav Archer bonus is not the most egregious balance change in the world, but it doesn't feel like it accomplishes what it's supposed to do. Next up, we have number 4, Khmer Hussar and/or Arbalest. Now, these changes are a bit older, and if you're newer to the game, you may not remember that Khmer were once considered to be one of the very worst civs. They had a bad tech tree, minimal economy bonus, and were overly reliant on gimmicky builds and units. Of course, that bears little resemblance to the Khmer we see today. Fantastic economy and a tech tree that is good enough to get the job done in standard games, but still having the strong elephants and scorpions for games where gold is plentiful. There was a ton of iterating that happened with Khmer, and to the devs' credit, this civ is largely in a good spot right now. Unfortunately, in my opinion, there was an order of operations error when it came to buffing the civ. When you mess around with the civilization's economy bonuses, those are going to generally have more far-reaching implications than tech tree changes, because you generally have some sort of economy in every game, whereas not all games go to the Imperial Age. In the case of Khmer, the civilization received both both Arbalest and Hussar before they got their bonus of farmers not needing to drop off food. Basically, the devs added Arbalest to Khmer. It wasn't enough. They added Hussar. That wasn't enough either. Then they created an entirely new economy bonus that immediately transformed Khmer from being a mediocre civ economically that struggled to make it to the late game to just the very opposite. Khmer immediately became overpowered and were subsequently nerfed over time, first by removing bombard cannons and then by lowering the farming rating a bit more. Those were good changes, but we still find Khmer as a top pick on most maps at a high level. Their economy is up there with Vikings and Poles in terms of strength, but they have a better check tree by far than Vikings, and their eco bonuses are more automatic and fast acting than Poles. Now, you could approach toning down Khmer in a few ways, but personally, I think the super good eco is interesting, and it fits the civ thematically as relying on big expensive units, and generally makes for streamlined gameplay. I would go about nerfing Khmer in removing either Hussar or Arbalest, but definitely not both. Those two units are used in combination all the time with Khmer, and the fact that the civ has access to such strong meta units on top of their amazing economy feels a bit much. Personally, between the two, I'd get rid of Hussar. Khmer are a civ that are supposed to be about elephants, siege, and a supporting cast of other units. Having an identity as a Hussar spam civ feels very off thematically, historically, and most importantly, balance-wise. It doesn't make sense that Khmer are just as good of a Hussar spamming civ as Slavs and Berbers, so removing that unit I think would go a long way in making the civ feel a bit less smooth in the Imperial Age. Fully upgraded light cav are still decent, but now you may need to rely a bit more on elephants and scorpions as power units. Honestly, you can put the top 3 in any order, but our number 3 most painful instance of power creep is the Portuguese, and in particular their new-ish forager bonus. It's kind of funny, because the bonus itself is pretty innocuous. It's just a total of 250 extra wood that the civ gets after depleting its forage bush on standard settings. The issue is, it filled the one missing piece the civ had, a weak early game. So for most of their history, Portuguese were generally considered a bad civilization on anything close to standard settings, but would wreak havoc on casual FFA games with insanely cost-efficient armies and infinite resources with Feudarias. However, that mattered little when the civ was just so slow to get going. No eco bonus or direct military bonus made Portuguese feel pretty generic, just a good tech tree bolstered by cheaper gold-costing units. But that was it. Organ guns could do crazy things when masked, which is why Viper popularized them so much, but they still weren't really seen as a top pick on pretty much any map type. But then, in December of 2022, the devs snuck in the bonus where Portuguese foragers generated 1 wood for every 3 food gathered. This was clearly done to help spice up their early game without being too game-breaking. And to be fair, the bonus is just a nice early game boost and it doesn't in itself break anything. However, it turned out that Portuguese more reliably getting to Castle Age was just really good. The gold discount was very useful when going for archers, knights, monks, and siege, and on closed maps, organ gun rushes started obliterating the latter. Organ guns were changed later on, but the unit is still incredibly good, even if it's a bit more focused on groups of units now. With a relatively good Dark Age, Portuguese can more comfortably go for a fast Imperial Age where they get access to the Feudarea, and the cost-efficient nature of the Portuguese army means it does not typically need a huge eco to be effective. It's true that Portuguese are still not objectively the very best Arabia civ or anything, but they are probably like top 6 or 7, and they're certainly top 3 on closed maps and top 5 on water maps and Nomad. This one bonus, just this extra 250 wood throughout the Dark Age and early Feudal Age, was enough to immediately turn a civ from being almost good enough to being really good on basically every map type. If this bonus needs to be in the game, then I would argue that the Portuguese tech tree should be nerfed. Removing husbandry would, in my mind, be a pretty good idea, as it would reinforce the slower nature of the Portuguese army, make them less versatile in the mid-game, and better differentiate them from the strong cavalry of their Spanish neighbor. That said, I freely admit that I am not too sure how to make Portuguese feel like a fun and compelling civ, but the forage bush bonus just feels like it was the wrong way to go and improve this civ. Coming in at number 2, we have the Incan food discount. So for much of its history, Incas were in an awkward place among the American civs. They had a nice tech tree and efficient units, but were always overshadowed by their much faster and more explosive Mesoamerican brethren. Well, the devs decided to change that back in Dynasties of India. Before then, Incas had no real military bonus, unlike both Aztecs and Mayans, and boy oh boy did the devs give them a good one. All military units became progressively cheaper on food cost per age. This value started at minus 15, 20, 25, 30% per age, but was then later nerfed down by 5% to minus 10, 15, 20, 25% per age. Now, I actually like this bonus. It gives Incas a bit of a faster opening and fits with the general themes of the civ, flexibility and efficiency. Unfortunately, Incas had been getting incremental buffs for years, and suddenly getting that big of a boost just put them a bit over the top. The civ always had a smooth Dark Age with the llama and more spacious houses, but getting a discount to their drush, men-at-arms rush, eagles, and skirmishers on top of all of that gave the civ just one of the best early games. Even after the discount got nerfed, Incas just feel like a civ civ that does everything that Aztecs and Mayans do, but better. All three civs are strong in the early game, but Incas additionally can go for the Skirmisher plus Eagle Scout composition in Feudal Age far more efficiently than the other two Eagle civs. Come Castle Age, Incas, thanks to their food discount, have the best trash play and Eagle Warrior spam. On top of that, Incas still have the flexibility advantage because they have Redemption Monks, unlike Mayans, and Thumb Ring Crossbowmen, unlike Aztecs. Slingers and Kamyuks are both very cost-efficient units, and now it's so much easier to get there. We regularly see Inca players in pro games just rocket up in population throughout the mid-game far faster than their opponent, as their armies are both cheap and strong. To make matters worse, Incas have oppressive matchups against specifically Aztecs and Mayans in the Castle Age due to how easy it is for the Inca player to make both Eagles and Slingers. That combination in particular is not one that either of the Mesocivs can counter very effectively in mid-game. So what to do with the Inca food discount? The obvious choice would be to reduce it by another 5%, so it's only minus 5, 10, 15, 20% food cost on military units per age. Slingers as well could probably do with the Castle Age nerf. Maybe reduce their bonus damage by half and add an elite Slinger upgrade in the Imperial Age. I do think that Incas need this bonus in general, as before it was added, the Civ never really saw much play. It just feels that in their current state, Incas are one of the most overtuned Civs in AoE2. This video is still a top 5 list, so it seems only fair that before we get to number 1, I'll throw in some honorable mentions. These buffs are ones that may feel overtuned, but the Civ itself does not feel quite overpowered because of all of the other Civs that are even more overtuned. In my magical world where I get to revert some of these changes in the main list, I feel like some of these other Civs would likely become too strong themselves. So with that in mind, some of the other bonuses on my radar would be Hindustanis. With their villager discount increased again, Gulams and Chattagni hand cannoneers are looking really strong at all levels of play. Lacking Knight still makes the Civ awkward, but the balancing act of Hindustanis is one that I'd pay close attention to going forward. For what it's worth, Hindustanis were the most picked Civ in the Hidden Cup 5 qualifiers and are currently the best performing Civ on ladder, although not by that much. Malians. With their more efficient gold miners, Malians quickly became very popular on a ton of different map types. Their early game is so strong and versatile that they can be competitive in most situations, but on top of that, Gebetos in particular feel quite tough to stop these days. The unit got slowly buffed over a long time, and maybe too much so. Saracens. With their Castle Age camels boasting 145 HP with bloodlines, this is pretty crazy for a Civ with such a broad tech tree, and I think that if the very top Civs get toned down, Saracens will likely feel difficult to stop. Another example of overcompensating a Civ bonus. Slavs. With their 15% faster working farmers. Again, Slav food eco feels really strong, and now that they have so many other tools at their disposal than when their bonus was nerfed down to 10% in the first place, it feels like a few nerfs to the very best Civs will spike Slavs up to being constant picks on both open and closed land maps. And lastly, Vietnamese. With their faster researching technologies, this is yet another example of a bonus that didn't really feel needed. Vietnamese were already a good Civ in plenty of different settings, and now their combination of versatility and economy make them the go-to archer Civ in the current meta. Still, above all else, the number one most painful instance of power creep in AoE2 right now is the Malay, and in particular their free infantry armor bonus. So unlike all of the other Rise of the Raja civilizations who have been considered bottom tier at various points in their history, Malay were generally regarded to be, at the very worst, situationally good, and at the best, top tier on closed and water maps. This Civ's strength has always been on the back of the faster age-up economy/timing bonus, as it's allowed the Civ to be comparatively 2 villagers ahead when hitting Feudal Age through saved TC work time, and another 3 villagers ahead when reaching the Castle Age. All of this is great for sure, but a sneaky area in which the Malay excelled was their tech tree. Pretty much everything except cavalry was between good and great, and they even had strong elephant spam for cavalry. This meant that Malay have always been a viable option on maps where the mobility of cavalry wasn't a major factor, aka water maps, hybrid maps, nomad, and closed maps. Basically everything except Arabia and more open maps. However, the Civ was and is a bit tricky to play, especially for more casual players who aren't going to be as good with the non-cavalry Civs, and especially ones that make use of timings. So with Dynasties of India, the devs decided to add a new bonus to the Civ. Blacksmith infantry armor upgrades for free. On the one hand, I get it. Malay were probably looking a bit bad with ladder win rates, and they wanted a bonus that was going to be more likely used in most games. Because other than the age up bonus, the Malay fish trap bonus, dock team bonus, and harbors were only applicable on water maps, battle elephants are situational, and forced levy is only good in post-imp. Free infantry armor upgrades would help reinforce an otherwise lukewarm infantry Civ identity, help smooth out an awkward early game, and better facilitate tech switches into any of Halb's, Swordsman, and Karambits. The thing is, free infantry armor upgrades are like, really good. It is a nice bonus early on with Spearmen or leftover Swordsmen after a drush, and it's certainly a noticeable little buff on open maps. The issues come on the maps where Malay were already good. On closed maps like Arena and Black Forest, or even semi-closed maps like Hideout and Gold Rush, Malay can just so easily switch into infantry. Looking to get swarmed by cavalry? A quick Halb switch is much easier. Skirmishers looking to wreck your archers and monks, Karambits can instantly pop out of the castle with 3 pierce armor. The general army composition of halbs plus arbs is just so good and easy to tech into with this civ. Remember when the community complained that Vikings were overpowered? Well, Malay do basically everything that Vikings did, but with a better tech tree. I don't typically like throwing around raw stats in these videos, just because I feel like most of them lack context, but I think it's telling that in the recent Hidden Cup 5 qualifiers, Malay were literally the best performing civ, going 19-4. Even so, I will say that qualifier stats can be a bit iffy because there are a lot of mismatches in skill level. That said, 19-4 is pretty crazy. As to what to do with Malay going forward, I personally don't think the civ needed the bonus at all. Like Japanese, it's okay that Malay are a bit underwhelming on open maps when they shine on plenty of other settings. I get that Malay were even weaker than Japanese on open maps before this change, so if we aren't going to get rid of the bonus completely, I'd just make it so the first armor upgrade is free. That would help out their early game without making their mid-game timings too much more powerful. So that's going to be my 5 biggest issues with power creep in the current AoE2 metagame, as well as the changes I'd personally make to fix them. Still, I want to assert that AoE2 is a largely balanced game right now, with most of the more blatantly overpowered aspects coming from the newest civs like Monospas and Bohemians and whatnot. And those civs are likely to get nerfs and more balanced over time. My biggest concern is the ever-growing strength of the older civs, and that the devs feel this constant need to buff civs that don't necessarily need it. As I talked about in State of the Civs, there are a decent number of civilizations in the game right now that feel fine, but just overshadowed by the increasing strength of all of the other civs. Of course, let me know what you think of power creep in AoE2 right now in the comments, and what changes you think would be best to tone down some of the strongest civs in the game. Lastly, I do want to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, with Anonymous and Jared in the Great Wolf tier, and then Carolyn, Dieter, Liquid Egg Product, Ryru, and Tanduri in the Dire Wolf tier. If you're interested in supporting my channel further and getting some extra perks, the link to my Patreon is always in the description. But as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.